Okay, so hi everyone. So Felicity and I guess like everybody else here, are PIRE fellows from the summer of 2021, and we conducted our research on virtual video call interactions between German and English bilinguals. So, as everyone is probably aware at this point, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that means that we're all spending a lot more time on Zoom than we would necessarily be doing otherwise. Case in point being this presentation here. And that obviously has far reaching implications, particularly in second language classrooms. So, Felicity and I were curious to see how interactions on Zoom affected second language learners. So, we looked at some prior research on the influence of affective factors and comprehensibility on in person second language interactions. And this research found that people's ratings of their partner's comprehensibility can be influenced by their own anxiety. It also found that people's ratings of their own anxiety and their ratings of their own comprehensibility are negatively correlated. And that's kind of intuitive because you would assume that as your anxiety increases, you're less likely to understand the conversation that you're participating in. People's ratings of their partner's comprehensibility and their self rating of their own collaboration are also positively correlated depending on the task. And again, this is somewhat intuitive. So we borrowed some terms from this previous research, and these are the terms that were given to our participants in our post-task questionnaire. We defined anxiety to be the level of stress or worry that someone is feeling while completing a task, comprehensibility to be how much effort it takes to understand what is being said, and collaboration is the action of working with somebody else to produce something. So Felicity's study and my study were actually slightly different, but because we were working with an incredibly small sample size, thanks to pandemic recruiting, we decided to collaborate on our findings because they were similar enough in their methods. So we recruited a total of 16 participants from Penn State University and the Technische Universität Braunschweig. And the structure of both of our studies was a single Zoom call split into 3 sections, an icebreaker and 2 10-minute tasks, one in English and one in German. The order of the language was counterbalanced between sessions, and each session had at least one student from Penn State and one student from TUB. The max number of students in any given session was 4 students. So if a student was participating in Felicity's study, the tasks were focused on a discussion about the student experience during the pandemic, and students who participated in my study were asked to work together collaboratively to solve a problem. There was also some overlap. Some participants wound up participating in both studies. So after each task, participants completed a questionnaire where they were asked to rate their own levels of anxiety, collaboration, and comprehensibility, as well as their perception of their partner's anxiety, collaboration, and comprehensibility during the task. And finally, participants completed a language background questionnaire at the very end of the Zoom call. We also recorded these Zoom calls, so we have full transcripts as well as time spoken data. So the questionnaire that participants were given kind of looks like what you see with the example of the anxiety slider on the bottom. Basically, we asked participants to rate these different factors on a scale of 1 to 100, with 0 being a low level of whatever the factor was and 100 being a very high level. They were asked to rate their own anxiety at the beginning of the end of the task, their perception of their partner's anxiety at the beginning of the end of the task, their collaboration and their perception of their partner's collaboration, and how comprehensible they felt they were, as well as how comprehensible they found their partners to be during the task. We also asked participants to give 3 adjectives describing how they felt during the task and the task itself, and they were allowed to use German and or English adjectives because, as language learners know, not all adjectives are created equal across languages.
So taking a look at our results, First of all, we looked at the time that each participant spoke. So we compared the amount of time that each participant spoke in their L1 compared to the discussion in their L2. And we also compared how much each participant spoke across the entire task group. And some of our research questions going into this were, do participants tend to speak more in their L1 than their L2? And do native speakers tend to dominate in a conversation in terms of speaking a lot more than everybody else? So first of all, looking at, if you're ahead one slide.
Oh, sorry.
So looking at each individual participant, each pie chart here is one participant, and each slice of the pie chart represents the amount of time that the participant spoke during the discussion in their native language versus in their non-native language. And as you can see, for the vast majority of them, they're pretty much split down the middle. So most participants were getting equal opportunity to speak both in their L1 as in their L2. And looking at whole groups, so each pie chart here represents one discussion in one language for one group, and each slice of the pie chart represents the amount of time that one participant in the group is speaking. And as you can see, looking across from German to English or English to German, most of the breakdowns of the pie charts look relatively the same, regardless of which language, which means that for each participant, whether they're speaking in their L1 or in their L2, they're pretty much having the same dynamic in the conversation. So basically, native speakers are not speaking a whole bunch more than everybody else in a conversation. So yeah, just some takeaways from this are that participants generally speak for similar amounts of time, both in the L1 and the L2, and groups were generally not consistently dominated by native speakers. We also looked at factors of anxiety, collaboration, and comprehensibility. So we used the data from the post-task questionnaire to compare how participants rated their own factors and also how participants rated their partners' factors. And we looked at these patterns across both the discussions where the participant was rating the discussion that was in their L1 and also the discussion in their L2, but we found much stronger patterns in the L2. So for the sake of time, we're just going to be showing that data. So some of our research questions going into this were, do participants tend to rate themselves as more collaborative when they rate themselves as less anxious? Do participants tend to rate their interlocutors as more comprehensible when they rate themselves as less anxious? Do participants tend to rate their interlocutors as more comprehensible when they rate themselves as more collaborative? And finally, do participants tend to rate their interlocutors as more comprehensible when they also rate their interlocutors as being more collaborative? So first of all, we found a negative correlation between how collaborative participants rated themselves and how anxious they felt. So if I'm a participant, for example, and I feel less anxious, I'm more likely to rate myself as being more collaborative. And we also found a negative correlation between how a participant rated their own anxiety and how they rated the comprehensibility of their speaking partners. So for example, a participant who feels less anxious is more likely to rate their speaking partners as being more comprehensible. And we also found a positive correlation between how collaborative a participant rated themselves and how comprehensible they rated their speaking partners. So a participant who feels that they're more collaborative tends to rate their speaking partners as being more comprehensible. And as you can see, the trend line there, it doesn't look very strong, but if we remove the outlier right over on the left, the line becomes a lot stronger. And finally, we also found a positive correlation between how a participant rated their speaking partner's collaboration and how they rated their speaking partner's comprehensibility. So a participant who tends to feel that their partner was being more collaborative is also more likely to rate them as more comprehensible, easier to understand. So just to summarize all that we found, the patterns that we found were pretty similar to those found in previous research on in-person L2 interactions. So we found a negative correlation between participants' ratings of their own collaboration and their own anxiety. We found that participants who rated themselves as less anxious tended to rate their interlocutors as more comprehensible. Participants who rated themselves as being more collaborative tended to rate their partners as being more comprehensible. and participants who rated their partners as being more collaborative also rated them as being more comprehensible. We also asked participants to provide adjectives for how they felt during the task and also to describe the task itself. And we compiled all of these words that participants wrote into word clouds. So you can see on the left, L2 is all the words that they used to describe their feelings and also the task during the discussion that was in their L1. And then on the right is all the words they used to describe the discussion in their L2. And the size of each word relates to how frequently it was mentioned by each participant or across each participant. And as you can see, a lot of people put interesting, which is not a very informative word. So we decided to take that out to see, what other patterns arose. So if we take out interesting, you can see across both the L1 and the L2, there are a lot of really big positive words like curious, comfortable, creative, relaxed, happy. There are more negative words in the L2 discussion, like nervous, overwhelmed, difficult, which is maybe to be expected, but looking across the whole, pretty much all of them are pretty positive. So in general, participants were enjoying the discussions and were feeling pretty positive during them.
So to kind of summarize all of our data, from our time spoken data, we were surprised to learn that native speakers don't tend to dominate the conversation, and also that participants tend to speak for similar amounts of time across their L1 and their L2. So that means that there might be another factor that contributes more to how much a participant speaks than necessarily their L1 versus L2. We also found that virtual L1, L2 interactions show similar patterns to those found in previously conducted in-person studies. We found that in the L2, speakers who tend to rate their anxiety as higher also tend to rate their collaboration as lower. Speakers who tend to rate their anxiety as higher tend to rate their partner's comprehensibility as lower. Speakers who tend to rate their collaboration as higher tend to rate their partner's comprehensibility as higher, and speakers who tend to rate their partner's collaboration as higher tend to rate their partner's comprehensibility as higher. Finally, students described L2 tasks more negatively than L1 tasks, but overall, the adjectives were overwhelmingly positive, which is indicative of these conversations not being quite as intimidating or anxiety-inducing as we might have thought. So the practical implications of this are kind of interesting because we all anticipate, second language interactions to be very scary, very anxiety inducing, and our findings show that they're really not that bad for second language learners. So the pedagogical implications of this are that if we can create a virtual environment where we are reducing participant anxiety and increasing participant collaboration, we might be able to foster an environment of increased comprehensibility, and that would obviously help second language learners learn the language in a more meaningful way. So the other implication here is that students no longer necessarily need to travel to have a meaningful conversation in their L2 with native speakers. It's just a Zoom call away, so you could be talking to someone on the other side of the world and still have a meaningful interaction. So here are our references. And we would like to thank our advisor, Dr. Carrie Jackson, Dr. Holger Hopp from the Technische Universität Braunschweig, and the PIRE program and funding, as well as the National Science Foundation Office of International Science and Engineers.